I'm going to move very quickly through this and provide sources as I go so you people can follow up. Point 1. The state exists as an extension of the market's inherent basis in competitive advantage. Number 2, voluntarism, coercion, and the non-aggression principle are too narrow as abstractions to be considered real, as they do not allow for real-world synergistic pressures to be taken into account. They are highly reductionist. And if you're not familiar with these terms, they're a big part of Anarcho Capitalism. They're also a part of the Austrian school and libertarian philosophy. Please look it up. I'm not going to explain the historical issues. Number 3, structural violence is the most important problem in the world today, the largest source of death, and it is built in to the market system, not a statist consequence. And as you might know from Stefan Molyneux, everything that's wrong in the world apparently comes from the state, at least the vast majority. Almost everything that is brought up as a problem is somehow logically deduced to being a state interference against the market. And number 4, problem resolution on the scale of what is technically possible today will never occur in the market due to its structural limitations. They are opposite systems in what they are attempting to do. To create an abundance in a world that is making money off of scarcity, it becomes very, very difficult, and I will go into more explanation in a moment. However, before I do, please note that everything I'm going to speak of can be found in the current edition of the Zeitgeist Movement Defined Orientation Guide, which is still under development, but all of the criticisms of the market have been finished in around 13 to 15 essays. This can be downloaded for free and will also be published fairly soon and also available for free in various forms. Point 1.
Within the state is the mechanism of the market. The market creates the state because of its interest in self-preservation, differential advantage, and the basic gaming strategy. I'm sure you're familiar with all of the macroeconomic utilitarian assumptions by Nash and the like. The entire premise of gaming within this system is based around these levels of advantage. The government is run by the higher-end entrepreneurs of our world. The ownership class has been running the government since day one. It is an extension of the market system. Of course, they're going to go to the government and get them on their side so they can actually have the benefit of having a corporation that has no legal responsibility.
This point is really simple. If the basis of a society's economy is open competition with everyone seeking competitive advantage over each other for survival and quality of life, hence with laborers competing for employment and businesses competing for market share, since, of course, as you know, your very survival and right to life depends on how well you game in the market, the interest to ever improve that gaming strategy persists, and the highest form is to find a way to restrict the capacities of others in the open market to compete against you. The state is currently the best tool. However, even if the state was removed, the use of other forms of coercion would definitely persist. The word mafia comes to mind almost immediately, as it embodies this tendency perfectly and accessibly. Interestingly and unknowingly, Stefan actually acknowledges this.
Free market, it draws people to use the state, because any CEO who is going to eschew political action is going to be replaced by the shareholders with a CEO who's going to embrace political action. So I agree with you that there is definitely a huge incentive to pursue political action and gain economic advantage through the violence of the state over your competitors. But that's because there's a state.
If the interest is there to create some type of power consolidation, to maintain differential advantage, to override the interests of other producers, to secure wealth and market share for a particular group, that could manifest in all sorts of other ways. I mean, I look at the state as just one example of how this power consolidation tendency materializes.
However, he defends the argument by saying that to create the state once again after it is gone would be impossible. Let's assume that's true. Does that stop the other basic so-called criminal mentalities to seek advantage in other coercive ways? Of course not. Hence my point. As long as the competitive ethos is the driving mechanism of survival, you will always see this abuse in one form or another. On the other hand, in a natural law resource-based economy, which I'm not going to go into in this talk in any detail, I just want to mention it, a system of mutual collaboration is created which has literally no structural incentive to compete for resources at all. It is designed for optimized access, strategically, for every human being, which is a new technical fact that we have in the world today due to something called ephemeralization. You see, the market was born in the midst of overwhelming scarcity in the past. Property rights and trade are excellent mechanisms in such a world. However, today, the great shift is the move towards seeking global abundance to meet human needs directly and reduce suffering and deprivation. Hence, this pattern of competitive economic behavior is no longer needed. And what the Austrians and the like don't understand is that in a system based on scarcity and competition as its driving mechanism for profit and that efficiency that is profit, the idea of producing a surplus on such a scale is the exact opposite incentive. Hence, it's not going to happen on the scale it could if the market was removed. And the final point, which is passive but important, is the tendency that's been found that the more money that people get, the more wealth they acquire, the more antisocial they become. And this is important to think about why those that are really wealthy tend to seek the most structural coercion. I would like to source 3 studies for your review. Higher social class predicts increased unethical behavior, out of the University of Michigan. Having less, giving more, the influence of social class on pro-social behavior, and how wealth reduces compassion, Scientific American. The second point regards voluntarism, coercion, and the non-aggression principle, and how they are too reductionist to be valid when basic survival pressures are considered, along with the very nature of the market.
Truncated distinctions. This means that on certain ideas which appear to have integrity are found to be in truth too narrow in their consideration to be deemed viable philosophically or empirically. In other words, the true underlying meaning and purpose claimed to be represented is substantially misrepresented, and hence the concept becomes empirically void.
Coercion and voluntarism are opposites. Coercion means motivation by force, and voluntarism is motivation by personal choice. As I will argue, both of these ideas share the same vacuum and detachment from reality. When people give common examples of this idea, such as Stefan, who often talks about a person putting a gun to your head, they don't stop to think about structural coercion and the synergy of pressures that go on in the day-to-day real world. The spectrum of influence in our lives is enormous and multifaceted. First, we have the natural condition of life support coercion, as obvious as it is, and it's nothing we can do about it. I mean, if you don't eat food, obviously, or drink water, you'll get sick and die. As immutable and obvious as this is, it's still a kind of structural coercion. However, on the scale of our human-created socioeconomic system, we have options with respect to how we organize our means of access of the necessities of life and resources. The current method, market capitalism, has a deep propensity towards social imbalance and class warfare. In other words, everyone is fighting, some are winning, some are losing, market correction, and even the propagated incentive structure in classical economics says that this imbalance is actually good, as it forces people into action for so-called progress. If you want to get a sense of how voluntary our economic choices are in the world today, go ask the prostitutes in the streets of New York City how much they like their job. Or better yet, go ask the 22 million Americans who are underemployed or unemployed at this time. Or perhaps the sweatshop laborer that makes 15 cents an hour. If you believe that all decisions in exchange are for mutual benefit of both, why is it that in a 2012 poll, only 19% of Americans actually enjoyed their job? If they didn't like it, why don't they just find another one? Well, could it be that there aren't other jobs available for their skill set or other reasons? Could it be that our life experience and our human condition makes certain propensities manifest over others, and hence our skills can fall in and out of use, respectively with the market? Or what about mechanization, which has recently been estimated to be capable of taking over half of all jobs in America, which basically means, given the standard of technology America has, it could take over half of all jobs on the planet, if not more. If that occurs, where does this precious voluntary choice for mutual exchange of labor for income find resolution and stability? Or how about a disabled elderly woman who is barely making ends meet, going to a store only to buy cheap, poor-quality foodstuffs, since that is all she can afford? Is it her decision to maintain such poor nutrition? Is it her voluntary choice? You see, this delusion was born in the utilitarian philosophy of market perception. A while back, some economists got tired of irritating outcries about how capitalism was abusing laborers and exploitation and perpetuating class warfare and increased stratification. So they conjured up this abstraction that said, hey man, if you exchange, it's your choice. You are nothing more than exchangers, and therefore everything is mutually beneficial at all times, period. Now shut the fuck up. That's basically what happened. And when I brought this problem up to Stefan, you know what he told me? He told me I should go live in the forest if I didn't like it.
How is the act of trade coercive?
Because people have to trade in this system to survive unnecessarily. They have to do something.
They don't have to trade.
They have to do.
How do they have to trade?
They have to either
They
trade.
can go and I mean, 98% of the world's surface is uninhabited. They can go and live in the woods, and they can grow their own food, and they can hunt their own animals. I don't understand how it is they have to trade.
As far as the non-aggression principle, it's the same circumstance. First of all, it's invented out of thin air as a moral code, which says that aggression is illegitimate. Well, what is aggression? Is that only a behavior, or could it be a system of behaviors interworking, rather hidden from view? If a person holds a great surplus of resources as a result of their success in the market game, while another person starves next door because they have been unable to obtain labor or business due to economic correction, depression, recession, or the like, is the hoarding of that excess wealth a form of aggression, since that excess surplus could save a life? Put a different way, if HIV drugs that are now available and affordable in the U.S., which enable most people to live fairly well now if treated early, what about those in Africa with this enormous epidemic that don't have access to those very simple practical drugs today? Is it not aggression in a certain sense that part of the global society basically ignores the fact that these treatments could be made available and save millions of lives? It seems like a hard question to many, but it's no different than a person dying of dehydration on the street while another person holds a bottle of water over their head but refuses to give it to them. Is that aggression? In truth, all that these narrow, detached distinctions really do is enable those who subscribe to them, consciously or not, to conveniently and logically deny the physical realities denoted, and hence what is actually occurring in the real world due to the market's inherent imbalance, win-lose propensity. And this leads us directly to structural violence. Structural violence, as defined by Dr. James Gilligan, former head of the Center for the Study of Violence at Harvard University, is the increased rates of death and disability suffered by those who occupy the bottom rungs of society. He differentiates structural violence from behavioral violence, where the former operates continuously rather than sporadically.
Main social and economic causes of violence, and I'll add political causes, are those that divide the population into the superior and the inferior, the strong and the weak, the rich and the poor. The more highly unequal a society is, the higher its rates of violence.
According to Kohler and Alcott in their 1976 work, An Empirical Table of Structural Violence, a dramatic 18 million deaths were extrapolated to occur each year due to structural violence, and that study was done over 30 years ago. Categorically, structural violence is the most deadly killer on the planet. This form of violence, rooted in inequality, creates psychological disease, physiological disease, behavioral violence, general crime, and much more. It is caused by both the stress of being relatively poor, meaning a psychosocial perception, and the more obvious limitations of being absolutely poor without being able to meet your basic needs. For those that want to research this issue, a very detailed essay in our guide called Defining Public Health is recommended, and many sources are cited. Overall, this is likely the greatest revelation in understanding public health causality in modern history, and it reveals how deeply social we are. And while state policy might have a bearing in certain instances with respect to the creation of economic inequality, market capitalism has, without a doubt, been the driving force of inequality historically, as it is based on competitive advantage, as noted before. In the words of Jerry Moeller, author of The Mind and the Market, Capitalism and Western Thought, inequality is indeed increasing almost everywhere in the post-industrial capitalist world. But despite what many on the left think, this is not the result of politics, nor is politics likely to reverse it. For the problem is more deeply rooted and intractable than generally recognized. Inequality is an inevitable product of capitalist activity, and expanding equality of opportunity only increases it, because some individuals and communities are simply better able than others to exploit the opportunities for development and advancement that capitalism affords. You can also validate this effect by comparing those countries that are known to have more regulation of their sovereign markets to those with less. Those with more laissez-faire policies reveal more inequality and hence more structural violence and public health problems. In short, the market is bad for your health.